Sorry, sir.
Sorry, sir.
Are you sure
Are
you're
you
in the
sure
right
you're
seat?
in the right seat?
The flight attendant's tone was soft but sharp. Ethan Carter looked up from seat 2A, calm on the surface, pulse tightening beneath. He showed his phone, boarding pass glowing, first class, his name clear. She glanced at it, smiled thinly.
Perhaps there's been a
Perhaps there's
mistake.
been a mistake. Ethan's grip tightened on the armrest.
No mistake.
No mistake.
I bought this seat.
Her smile vanished. We'll need to verify that. She signaled for the supervisor. The air thickened. Around them, curious eyes lifted. Some suspicious, some amused, some quietly disdainful. A man muttered, "They'll let anyone up here now." Ethan stayed still, breath measured, knowing anger would only confirm their story. He'd lived this scene before, different room, same judgment. But in economy, a phone camera blinked red, recording the moment. A tiny light in a crowded cabin, about to expose what happens when quiet prejudice finally meets consequence. Ethan placed his phone on the tray table, the screen displaying his electronic boarding pass. First class, seat 2A, confirmed and paid. The American Express Centurion card, solid black, heavier than normal plastic, sat in his wallet. He'd used it thousands of times. It had never been questioned before. Ashley stopped beside his seat. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass again?" Ethan looked up. Her tone was pleasant enough, but there was an edge underneath. He'd already scanned his pass at the gate. "Of course," he said, turning his phone toward her. The QR code gleamed on the screen, along with his name, seat assignment, and frequent flyer status. She studied it longer than necessary, eyes flicking between screen and face, as though solving a puzzle that didn't fit. "And you're sure this is your seat?" The question hung in the air. Around them, other first-class passengers, mostly white, mostly older, began to notice. A silver-haired man in 1B glanced over his newspaper. A woman across the aisle paused mid-sip of her champagne. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 2A, confirmed." Ashley's smile tightened. She turned to Maria, a younger flight attendant near the galley, and whispered something. Maria's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. Ashley turned back. "Can I see your credit card? The one you used to purchase the ticket?" Ethan felt the first flicker of something dark in his chest. Not anger yet, but recognition. The extra questions, the lingering looks, the assumption that his presence required additional verification. He reached for his wallet without protest, extracting the Centurion card. It caught the cabin light, matte black and accusatory. Ashley took it, examining both sides as though checking for counterfeits. Maria shifted uncomfortably nearby, gaze darting between them. "This seems unusual," Ashley said finally. "Unusual how?" Ethan's voice remained calm, professional. "We just need to be careful. You understand?" Ashley didn't elaborate. The subtext was clear. "You don't look like someone who belongs here." The man in 1B folded his newspaper with a crisp snap. "Is there a problem?" His tone suggested the problem was Ethan's presence, not Ashley's interrogation. "Just a routine check, sir," Ashley assured him, suddenly warmer. She hadn't checked anyone else's credit card. She hadn't asked anyone else if they were sure about their seat. Ethan watched her compare his ID to the card, then to his face, as though he were a suspect in a lineup. Maria stood frozen, expression caught between protocol and conscience. In economy, Marcus had his phone out now, recording discreetly. "Mr. Carter," Ashley said, emphasizing his name as though testing its authenticity. "I need to confirm this with the gate agent. Please wait here." She didn't wait for his response before turning toward the cockpit, credit card still in hand. Ethan exhaled slowly. He glanced at his watch. 1:47 p.m. Departure in 13 minutes. He opened his notes app and began documenting. Ashley Collins, lead flight attendant, flight AA2891, requested verification of valid boarding pass, credit card, and ID. No other passengers questioned. Around him, the cabin had gone quiet in that particular way spaces do when people pretend not to watch something they're absolutely watching. The woman with champagne whispered to her husband. The man in 1B shook his head slowly. Ashley returned from the cockpit, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice carried just enough. "Yes, we have a situation in first class. The passenger doesn't match the typical profile for this fare class." Typical profile. The words landed like a slap. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his expression remained neutral. He'd learned long ago that anger, even righteous anger, would only be used against him. So he sat still, hands folded, waiting. Always waiting to prove he belonged in spaces he'd literally built. Maria caught his eye briefly. In that glance, Ethan saw recognition, perhaps apology, but she looked away quickly, unwilling or unable to intervene. The recording light on Marcus's phone continued to blink, capturing everything. Ashley returned with reinforcement. David Walsh arrived moments later, a white man in his 50s, with the bearing of someone who wielded minor authority like a weapon. He didn't greet Ethan. He simply stood in the aisle, arms crossed. "Sir, we've received reports that you may be in the wrong seat. First-class tickets are expensive. Do you have proof of purchase?" Ethan looked up slowly. "I showed everything to your staff. My ticket, credit card, and ID. What else do you need?" Walsh's expression didn't soften. "These days, credit cards can be borrowed. We need to protect our legitimate passengers." The word hung there. Borrowed. Not stolen, but the implication was clear. Around them, passengers leaned closer. The man in 1B nodded slightly, as though Walsh had articulated something he'd been thinking all along. "Are you accusing me of credit card fraud?" Ethan's voice remained level, but something cold had entered it. Walsh deflected smoothly. "I'm just following protocol, sir. It's nothing personal." But everything about this was personal. The protocol didn't apply to the white woman sipping champagne or the silver-haired man with his newspaper. It applied only to the black man in seat 2A. Ashley stepped closer, emboldened. Maybe he upgraded using miles? Those can be purchased on black market sites. Her voice carried just far enough for nearby passengers to hear. This was theater now. Ethan took a slow breath. "I paid $4,200 for this ticket. One-way, last-minute booking. Check your system." Walsh pulled out a tablet, tapping with deliberate slowness. "System shows payment went through, but we need to call the credit card company to confirm it wasn't fraudulent." He began dialing right there in the aisle. The cabin had gone silent except for Walsh's murmured conversation. Ethan could feel eyes on him from every direction. Maria stood near the galley, hands clasped tightly, refusing to meet his gaze. In economy, Marcus's phone continued recording. Walsh finished his call and lowered the phone. His face had gone slightly pale. "The card is valid. No fraud reported." He said it as though disappointed. "So we're done here?" Ethan asked. "Not quite. We still need to verify your identity more thoroughly. Airport security will assist." Walsh raised his radio before Ethan could respond. "We need assistance in first class. Passenger is becoming agitated." Ethan hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved from his seat. But Walsh was rewriting the narrative in real time, transforming compliance into aggression. "I'm not agitated," Ethan said quietly. "I'm sitting in my seat. Sir, I need you to remain calm." Walsh's voice had taken on an official tone, designed to sound reasonable to everyone except the person it targeted. Ashley added fuel. "He's been hostile since boarding. We feel unsafe." The lie was so smooth it almost sounded true. Maria's eyes widened, but she said nothing. She simply turned away. The man in 1B spoke up. "If there's a security concern, shouldn't he be removed?" Ethan felt the weight of it, the entire system aligning against him. He looked down at his phone and opened his email. 2. EVP Operations. Subject, Incident Report. Flight AA2891. Immediate attention required. He typed quickly. Pattern of discrimination targeting minority passengers. Request full investigation. This is not the first time. He attached screenshots and saved it as a draft. Walsh was still on his radio. Ashley stood beside him, arms crossed, satisfied. Maria remained by the galley, face pale. "You're calling security because I'm sitting in a seat I purchased?" Ethan's voice was quiet but carried through the cabin. "We're calling security because you're refusing to cooperate," Walsh said. "I've answered every question, shown every document." Ethan paused. "What you're doing right now, it has a name, and it's being recorded." Walsh's eyes flicked toward Marcus's phone, then to other devices. Recording lights blinked like small red eyes, but he'd gone too far to back down. "Security is on the way. You can explain everything to them." Ethan nodded slowly. He glanced at his watch. 1:53 p.m. 6 minutes since this began. He thought about himself 20 years ago, a poor MBA student ejected from an airport lounge because someone decided he looked like cleaning staff. That memory was why he'd built this airline, why he'd spent 6 months flying incognito, reading 47 buried complaints, waiting for this moment. Walsh's radio crackled. Security en route. ETA 2 minutes. Ethan opened his email draft and pressed send. 2 airport security officers arrived with heavy boots echoing through the jetway. Both were white, both carried the kind of presence that made conversations stop. They entered first class with hands near their belts, eyes locking onto Ethan. No questions, no attempt to understand. They simply walked toward him as though his guilt had already been established. "Sir, you need to come with us," the taller officer said. His name tag read Morrison. He didn't ask. He commanded. Ethan remained seated, hands visible on the armrests. "May I ask why?" "We've received a report of a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions." Morrison's tone was flat, bureaucratic. "I've complied with every instruction," Ethan replied calmly. "I've shown my boarding pass, credit card, and identification, all verified as legitimate." The second officer stepped closer. "Sir, we can do this the easy way or the hard way." Around them, the cabin had transformed into an audience. Passengers craned their necks. Some held up phones. The man in 1B watched with approval, as though justice were being served. Marcus stood in economy, his voice cutting through. "This is wrong. He didn't do anything." Morrison ignored him entirely. "Sir, stand up, now." Ethan took a slow breath. He could resist, force them to drag him, make a scene, but he'd learned that resistance, even righteous resistance, would only be weaponized against him. So he stood, moving with deliberate calm. "I'll walk. No need to touch me." But Morrison gripped his arm anyway, fingers digging into expensive fabric. Unnecessary. Performative. A display of control for the watching crowd. Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit then, uniform crisp, authority unquestioned. "This is my aircraft," he announced. "If he doesn't leave voluntarily, we'll have him arrested for interfering with flight crew." The threat was clear. A federal offense, up to 20 years in prison. It didn't matter that Ethan had interfered with nothing. Ethan met the captain's gaze. "I haven't interfered with anyone. I've been sitting in my assigned seat." "That's not what my crew reported," Reynolds said dismissively. He turned to Walsh. "Get him off my plane." Walsh stepped forward with visible satisfaction. "And I'm recommending you be permanently banned from this airline." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Ashley, standing behind Walsh, added her blade. "Should have flown economy where you belong." "Where you belong." The words detonated in the cabin. Some passengers inhaled sharply. Others nodded, believing they'd witnessed legitimate security action. The man in 1B smiled. Maria covered her mouth, eyes glistening, but said nothing. She was trapped between conscience and career. So she looked away. Morrison guided Ethan toward the exit, grip unnecessarily tight. As they passed through first class, Ethan cataloged every detail. The time, 1:57 p.m., name tags, exact wording of threats. He'd been documenting discrimination for months, 47 buried complaints. Now it was personal. Marcus raised his phone higher, live streaming. "This is flight AA2891, black man, first class ticket, being removed for existing." The caption, "Your first class while black." Within seconds, views accumulated. 50, 200, 1,000. At the aircraft door, Ethan paused and turned back. He looked at Walsh, Ashley, Captain Reynolds. His expression was unreadable, neither angry nor defeated. "You should know," he said quietly, "that everything you've done has been documented, not just by passengers, by me." He held up his phone briefly. "And these procedures? They seem to target a very specific demographic. I wonder if you know who you're actually dealing with." Walsh's face flickered with uncertainty. "Is that a threat?" "It's an observation and a warning. Systems that operate on bias eventually face correction. Today might be that day." Morrison tugged his arm. "Let's go, sir." Ethan allowed himself to be led down the jetway. Behind him, the cabin erupted, some defending, others questioning, most relieved the disruption was over. Walsh pulled out his tablet, typing an incident report. Passenger aggressive, refused requests, created disturbance, removed for safety. Ashley nodded, preparing to co-sign the lie. In the cockpit, Reynolds ran through pre-flight, unbothered. He'd seen passengers removed before. It was routine. None of them noticed Maria slipping into the lavatory, hands shaking. None saw Marcus's live stream hit 50,000 views, then 100,000. None realized Ethan's email was already being read by people with power-to-ground planes and end careers. And none understood that the man they'd just humiliated didn't need to prove he belonged in first class. He owned the entire airline. The cabin door sealed with a hydraulic hiss. The jetway pulled back. From the terminal, Ethan stood at the window, watching his own plane prepare for departure. He pulled out his phone. One new email from the executive vice president. "Mr. Chairman, what do you need?" Ethan typed, "Ground the flight. Now. I'm invoking executive authority. ETA your arrival, 8 minutes." He pressed send and waited. Inside the cabin, Walsh felt victorious. Ashley began deleting unfavorable details from her report. Reynolds requested pushback clearance. Marcus's video went viral. 200,000 views and climbing, hashtags exploding across platforms. But none of them knew that in exactly 8 minutes, their world would stop turning. Inside the cabin, Walsh's phone rang, the credit card company on the line. He listened, face draining of color, then hung up slowly. "The card is valid," he said to Ashley, voice flat. "No fraud, no dispute, legitimate account in good standing." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his features. He'd been so certain. The protocols had always worked before. The extra scrutiny, the pointed questions, the implicit suggestion that someone didn't belong. Those protocols had never been challenged. They'd never needed to be, because the people they targeted rarely had the resources or platform to fight back. But Walsh couldn't back down now. Not with passengers watching. Not with his authority already committed. "Okay, the card is valid," he said louder now, addressing the cabin as much as Ashley. "But we completed the correct procedure. Security concerns require thorough verification." Ashley nodded quickly, relieved to have her judgment validated even in retreat. Captain Reynolds, standing in the cockpit doorway, checked his watch. They were now 12 minutes behind schedule. "Are we clear to depart?" he asked impatiently. "Yes, sir," Walsh replied. "The situation has been resolved." Resolved. As though removing an innocent man from a seat he'd purchased was a solution rather than a crime. As though humiliation could be filed away as procedure. Marcus, still recording from economy, muttered into his phone. They kicked him off. No apology. Nothing. Just gone. The comment section of his live stream had exploded. "This is America. Sue them into bankruptcy. I'm never flying this airline again. Where's the NAACP?" The view count climbed past 300,000, then 4, then 5. Shares multiplied. News outlets began picking it up. Twitter erupted with "Nakshur first class while black," trending in the top 3 nationwide. But the departure didn't happen. Instead, something strange occurred. The cabin lights flickered once, just a brief interruption, then stabilized. The background hum of auxiliary power shifted in pitch, like an engine changing gears. Captain Reynolds frowned and returned to the cockpit, conferring with his first officer in low, urgent tones. Passengers began to notice the delay. The man in 1B looked at his watch and sighed audibly. The woman across the aisle flagged down Maria. "How much longer? I have a connecting flight." Maria forced a smile. "Just a few more minutes, ma'am." But her hands were still shaking, and her voice lacked conviction. In the terminal, Ethan stood at the window, phone in hand. 7 minutes had passed since he'd sent the email. His jaw was tight, but his posture remained composed. Behind him, travelers rushed past with rolling suitcases, oblivious to the storm gathering just beyond the glass. He'd built this airline from nothing 15 years ago, after that incident as a young MBA student, standing in an airport lounge with a valid day pass, watching security approach because someone had decided he looked like cleaning staff rather than a future executive. They'd escorted him out while other passengers, all white, all equally casually dressed, watched in silence. He'd vowed then that if he ever had the power, he'd create a different kind of company. One that treated people with dignity, one that didn't operate on assumption and bias. For 6 months, he'd flown incognito, testing his own systems. He'd read every complaint that came through, 47 in the past year alone, all involving passengers of color questioned about their tickets, their payments, their right to be in premium cabins. Middle management had buried them, dismissed them as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. But Ethan had seen the pattern, an 847% higher rate of verification requests for minority passengers compared to white passengers. 0 white passengers asked to prove their credit cards weren't stolen. 0 white passengers removed from flights for not matching the profile. The data didn't lie, and today he'd experienced it firsthand. His phone buzzed, a text from the EVP, team mobilized, arriving gate in 90 seconds. Ethan looked back at the plane. Through the small windows, he could see passengers settling in, ready for takeoff. They had no idea what was coming. Neither did Walsh, Ashley, or Reynolds. They thought they'd won. They thought justice was something that happened to other people, in other places, never in their own carefully controlled domains. They were about to learn otherwise. Inside the cabin, Walsh had returned to his station near the galley, reviewing his incident report with satisfaction. He'd framed the narrative perfectly. Passenger displayed aggressive behavior when asked routine security questions, refused to cooperate with crew instructions despite multiple requests, created disturbance requiring security intervention, removed from aircraft per Federal Aviation Regulations 14 CFR 121.580, recommend permanent ban from airline for safety of crew and passengers. Ashley read over his shoulder and nodded approvingly. Good. Make sure you emphasize the aggression part. We need to protect ourselves from any blowback. She pulled out her own phone and began texting her supervisor. Handled difficult PAX situation. Followed all protocols, security involved, no injuries. Maria stood nearby, organizing blankets with trembling hands. She'd witnessed everything, the bias, the escalation, the manufactured justification. She wanted to speak up. She should speak up. But she thought of her student loans, her rent due in 2 weeks, her mother's medical bills that kept piling up. One word against Walsh or Ashley, and she'd be the next one removed. Not just from the flight, but from her job. So she stayed silent, folding blankets with mechanical precision, hating herself for it. Captain Reynolds' voice came over the intercom, crisp and professional. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. We'll be pushing back momentarily. The plane lurched slightly as the tug connected to the nose gear, beginning the slow push away from the gate. Passengers relaxed visibly. The crisis had passed. Order restored. The man in 1B opened his newspaper again, satisfied that the disruption had been handled. The woman across the aisle sipped her champagne, relieved she could finally get to Phoenix. In economy, several passengers exchanged glances that said, finally, as though they'd been held hostage by Ethan's mere existence rather than by the crew's prejudice. Then the engines stopped. Not wound down gradually, stopped. Cut off mid-spool with a mechanical finality that sent a jolt through the entire aircraft. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the emergency engagement of auxiliary power. The cabin lights dimmed to emergency levels for 3 long seconds before restoring to full brightness. The air conditioning went from a steady hum to a high-pitched whine. Confused murmurs rippled through the passengers like a wave. What was that? Are we okay? Is this normal? The man in 1B looked up from his newspaper with genuine alarm. The woman across the aisle gripped her armrests. Even Walsh and Ashley exchanged worried glances. Reynolds came back on the intercom, his voice now tight with barely controlled irritation. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief technical issue. Please remain seated while we assess the situation. But it wasn't technical. Through the cockpit window, Reynolds could see ground crew running toward the aircraft, waving their arms in urgent signals. His radio crackled to life with a transmission that made his blood run cold. AA2891, this is ground operations. You are ordered to return to gate immediately. Ground all engines. Repeat. Ground all engines. Executive override authority. Acknowledge. Reynolds stared at the radio as though it had spoken a foreign language. Ground ops, say again. Who authorized this override? Executive override, Captain. Chairman's direct order. Return to gate now. This is not a request. Chairman. The word hit Reynolds like a bucket of ice water. Ethan Carter, the founder, the man who'd built the airline from a single route to a national carrier. The man who owned 34% of the company's shares and chaired the board of directors. The man whose word could end careers with a single email. But why would Carter ground a random domestic flight on a Tuesday afternoon? What possible reason could there be unless... Reynolds' stomach dropped as understanding dawned. The passenger, the black man in first class, the one Walsh and Ashley had removed, the one Reynolds himself had threatened with federal charges. His hands began to shake on the controls. Copy that, ground ops, he managed, returning to gate. He turned to his first officer, his face drained of all color. We might have a serious problem. The first officer's eyes widened. How serious? Career-ending serious. In the cabin, Walsh's confidence began to crack. His radio, which had been silent, suddenly erupted with chatter from multiple channels. All crew members on AA2891, you are hereby suspended from active duties effective immediately. Do not delete any files. Do not communicate with other crew members. Remain on board and await corporate investigation team. This is not a drill. Acknowledge. Ashley's face went from confident to white as paper. What is this? What's happening? David, what's happening? Walsh shook his head, unable to form words. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. The tablet slipped from his hands and clattered to the galley floor. Around them, passengers began to panic. Why are we going back? What's wrong with the plane? I'm going to miss my connection. The jetway was reconnecting to the aircraft with a heavy, ominous thud that reverberated through the fuselage. Through the window, Walsh could see them coming. 4 people in immaculate business attire striding down the corridor with the purposeful gait of executioners. 2 men, 2 women, all carrying tablets and leather briefcases, all wearing lanyards with the airline's executive credentials dangling like badges of authority. Marcus, still live streaming from economy, caught every second. Wait, hold up. Something's happening. The plane stopped. We're going back to the gate. There are people coming. Corporate people. This is insane. He glanced at his phone screen, and his eyes went wide. Holy, we're at 470,000 viewers right now. This is going viral. Everyone needs to see this. The cabin door opened with a pneumatic hiss. The executive vice president of operations entered first, a tall black woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant bun, wearing a navy suit that screamed authority. Her expression was carved from granite, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Behind her came the head of legal, a white man with rimless glasses and a briefcase that probably contained enough litigation to bankrupt a small country. Then the head of HR, a stern Asian woman with a tablet already displaying termination paperwork. Finally, the chief safety officer, a Latino man whose presence alone made it clear that safety had been catastrophically compromised. They moved through first class like a tribunal entering a courtroom, and every eye in the cabin followed them. The casual conversations died instantly. Even the man in 1B lowered his newspaper, sensing that something unprecedented was unfolding. The EVP's voice carried through the entire cabin without need for amplification or microphone. It was the voice of someone accustomed to boardrooms and congressional hearings, someone who commanded respect through competence rather than volume. This flight is now under corporate investigation for civil rights violations under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and Company Code of Conduct, Section 4.2. All passengers will deplane immediately and be accommodated on alternative flights with full refunds, travel vouchers, and compensation for the inconvenience. This is non-negotiable. She paused, letting that sink in. Crew members David Walsh, Ashley Collins, and Captain James Reynolds will remain on board for immediate debriefing and suspension processing. All other crew members may depart, but must report to Human Resources within 24 hours for witness interviews. Walsh felt his legs weaken. He grabbed the galley counter for support. I don't understand. We followed protocol. We did everything by the book. This is your protocol, the EVP said, turning to face him with eyes like steel, is discrimination. Systematic, documented, illegal discrimination. And the man you removed from this aircraft? The man you accused of credit card fraud, threatened with federal arrest, and publicly humiliated in front of 63 witnesses? She paused, and in that pause, the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. He's standing in the jetway right now, and he'd like a word with all of you. The color drained from Ashley's face so completely she looked like a ghost. Walsh's grip on the counter tightened until his knuckles went white. Captain Reynolds, who had emerged from the cockpit to see what was happening, stopped dead in his tracks, one hand still on the cockpit doorframe. Ethan Carter appeared in the doorway. He didn't rush, he didn't shout, he didn't need to. He simply walked back onto his aircraft, with the measured calm of someone who had nothing left to prove and everything to reveal. His Armani suit was still unwrinkled, his expression was still neutral, almost serene, but his presence filled the space like a change in air pressure before a storm, and every person in that cabin felt it. Ashley's hand flew to her mouth, suppressing a sob. Walsh grabbed the nearest seat back with both hands now, needing the support to remain standing. Reynolds closed his eyes as though he could wish away reality through sheer force of will. Ethan walked down the aisle with steady, unhurried steps, past the first-class passengers who'd watched his humiliation, past the man in 1B who'd endorsed his removal, past the woman who'd clutched her purse tighter at his presence. He walked to seat 2A, his seat, and sat down with the quiet dignity of someone reclaiming stolen ground. He looked at Walsh, at Ashley, at Reynolds, at the EVP and her team, at the passengers filming on their phones, at Marcus, still live streaming to hundreds of thousands. And then, in the absolute silence of the cabin, Ethan Carter spoke. When Ethan spoke, his voice was quiet, but in the absolute silence, every syllable carried. My name is Ethan Carter. I founded this airline 15 years ago. I serve as chairman of the board of directors and own 34% of this company. He paused. For the past 6 months, I've been flying incognito to assess how employees treat customers who look like me. Ashley choked. Walsh's face went ash gray. Reynolds opened his eyes, watching his career collapse. Today, you verified my credit card, legitimate. Verified my ID, perfect match. Zero evidence of wrongdoing. He let that settle. But you called security anyway, threatened me with federal arrest, removed me from an aircraft I own. Why? Because you couldn't believe a black man belonged in first class. Walsh tried to speak. Mr. Carter, I didn't know. You verified everything, Ethan cut him off, but still called it borrowed, still implied fraud, manufactured aggression where there was only cooperation. You weren't following protocol. You were following prejudice. Legal held up a tablet. Walsh's report claims aggressive behavior. 7 videos show Mr. Carter calm and compliant. That's falsification, terminable with criminal liability. Ashley sobbed. I have 2 kids. How many parents did you humiliate who also have kids? Ethan's voice was steel. You had power. You abused it. Consequences follow. EVP stepped forward. Ashley Collins, David Walsh, terminated immediately for discrimination, falsification, code violations, clearances revoked, banned from aviation. Walsh protested weakly. I have union protection. Your union declined to contest given the documentation, HR said flatly. Reynolds tried salvaging something. Mr. Carter, I followed procedures. You witnessed discrimination and chose complicity. Ethan's voice sharpened. You threatened me with 20 years in prison. You're the captain. You had power to stop it. You simply decided the black man must be the problem. EVP continued. Reynolds, suspended without pay pending training and evaluation. Pass. You're demoted to first officer, 40% pay cut. Fail. You're terminated. Maria stepped forward, trembling. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry. I wanted to speak up but was scared. I knew it was wrong. Ethan's expression softened unexpectedly. You're not fired, Maria. Fear is understandable. You recognized wrong. That's the first step. He nodded to EVP. Maria joins training, gets a mentor, and our oversight committee. He turned to Marcus. Thank you for speaking up, for documenting. That took courage. Ethan looked into Marcus's camera. To everyone watching, This is systemic discrimination. Flight attendants assuming stolen cards. Captains trusting prejudice over evidence. Systems allowing this 47 times yearly without consequence. Legal stepped forward. 47 complaints in 12 months. All passengers of color. 847% higher questioning rate than whites. All buried by management. Until today. Ethan addressed the cabin. Immediate changes, mandatory bias training for all employees, third-party oversight with public reporting, $50 million civil rights fund, zero tolerance, one incident, done. Passengers erupted in thunderous applause. Marcus's live stream hit 1.8 million views, comments exploding with justice and tears. Walsh, being escorted out, tried once more. "I'll sue," Legal smiled coldly. "We have 47 complaints, footage, 7 videos, your false report, 63 witnesses. You'll lose everything including pension. Sue us. We're ready." Walsh deflated completely. He and Ashley were let off, broken by accountability finally arriving. Ethan spoke gently now. "To passengers who stayed silent, I don't blame you. Confronting injustice is hard, but remember this moment. Next time, find courage to speak. Your silence is a choice." As passengers filed past, some nodded respectfully. An older black woman stopped, placed her hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for fighting, for all of us." Decades of indignities shone in her eyes. Marcus stopped his live stream. "This is going to change things." Ethan nodded. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant." Security officers who'd removed Ethan now returned to escort Walsh and Ashley off. A reversal so complete it felt biblical. Walsh walked head down, shoulders slumped. Ashley's makeup ran in dark streaks, her uniform now a costume she no longer had permission to wear. HR followed them to the jetway, reading coldly, "David Walsh, Ashley Collins. All credentials, badges, and system access deactivated immediately. You'll retrieve personal belongings under supervision. You're prohibited from entering company property or contacting employees. Violation means trespassing charges and restraining orders." Walsh stopped, turned back. His face had aged a decade. 12 years. I gave this company 12 years. Legal didn't look up from his tablet. "You buried 47 discrimination complaints and falsified at least 14 incident reports. You didn't give this company anything. You stole 12 years of unchecked power and weaponized it against people who couldn't fight back, until you targeted someone who could." Walsh had no response. Security guided him away. The jetway door sealed with the finality of a coffin closing. Captain Reynolds stood near the cockpit, stripped of authority. EVP approached with a folder. "Your suspension is effective now. You'll receive formal notification outlining training requirements and evaluation procedures." She paused. "In my 15 years here, I've never seen anyone successfully return from this suspension. But if you're genuinely committed to change, there's a narrow path forward." Reynolds took the folder with shaking hands. "I just trusted my crew." "That's the problem," Ethan said from his seat. "You didn't think. You saw a black man and a white crew member, and you made a choice based on nothing except what they looked like." He walked closer. 23 years as a pilot. How many times did you make that choice and never get caught?" Reynolds' silence was answer enough. "Get the training. Do the work. Confront your bias," Ethan said. "If you earn your way back, you'll be better for it. But if you can't do that work honestly, you don't belong in any cockpit." Reynolds nodded, unable to speak, and walked off. Career, salary, authority, gone in minutes. Chief Safety Officer looked up from his tablet. "Sir, the Department of Transportation will launch a formal inquiry. The EEOC wants depositions, years-long legal process." "Good," Ethan said firmly. "I want it thorough, every complaint reviewed, every pattern documented, every person who buried evidence held accountable. And I want findings published, full transparency. If we have systemic racism, I want the world to know so we can burn it out by the roots." Legal nodded. 3 civil rights organizations offered to file amicus briefs supporting our investigation. They want to use this as precedent for industry-wide reform. "Accept their help. This isn't about protecting the company. It's about fixing an entire industry." Maria spoke quietly. "Mr. Carter, what happens to the rest of us?" Ethan considered carefully. "You'll be interviewed. History's reviewed. If you witnessed discrimination and stayed silent from fear, like you, there's a path through training and accountability. But if you stayed silent from agreement or participated passively, you're done. He softened. Maria, you're asking this question, taking responsibility. That's the difference between someone who can grow and someone who needs to go. EVP checked her watch. Sir, we need to deplane. Media's gathering at the terminal. Before leaving, Ethan walked to seat 2A one last time. His hand rested on the headrest. 15 years ago, I sat in a seat like this for the first time, saved for months to afford it. A flight attendant asked if I was sure I was in the right cabin. I was too powerless to do anything except feel shame. He looked up. Today I had the power to do something, so I did. He walked off his aircraft, leaving behind an empty cabin that would never be the same. Outside, news crews had set up. CNN, NBC, local stations, international press. Marcus's live stream had gone so viral the story was trending #1 everywhere. Ethan Carter Justice. First class while black. Aviation reform. Walsh and Ashley sat in separate security offices, waiting to be escorted off property. Through windows, they saw news coverage on terminal monitors. Their faces pixelated but recognizable, names scrolling across chyrons, actions described in damning detail. Both understood their careers, reputations, futures, all gone. Not because of conspiracy or false accusations, but because they'd finally been held accountable for choices they'd made dozens, maybe hundreds of times before. Justice, when it finally arrives, is thorough. The press conference was hastily arranged in the terminal. Ethan stood at a podium, EVP and Maria behind him. He spoke without notes. Today wasn't about revenge. It was about revealing a truth millions face daily, being judged by color, not character. I didn't need to prove I'm CEO to deserve respect. Every passenger deserves dignity, first class or economy, billionaire or student. He paused. I built this airline on a promise. Everyone belongs in the sky. Today, we failed that promise, systematically, repeatedly. But failure is only permanent if we refuse to learn. We're committing to real change, not just policies, but culture transformation. He gestured to Maria. Maria witnessed discrimination but stayed silent from fear of losing her job, of retaliation. She showed us courage isn't absence of fear. It's recognizing wrong even when too afraid to stop it, then taking responsibility. Maria represents accountability, not perfection, but honesty and commitment to improve. He turned to cameras. To everyone told they don't belong somewhere they earned the right to be, your dignity is non-negotiable. You deserve respect simply by existing. His voice became personal. To those in power, your silence is a choice. When you witness injustice and say nothing, you're not neutral. You're siding with oppression, telling victims their dignity matters less than your comfort. The terminal went silent. Choose justice. Choose to speak up. Choose to question assumptions. Choose to believe people instead of assuming they're lying because they don't look like you expect. Choose to be uncomfortable in service of what's right because comfort built on someone else's humiliation is complicity. A journalist asked about orchestrating the situation. I didn't orchestrate 47 buried complaints or 847% disparity, Ethan replied. I discovered it. If a CEO can't trust his company to treat all customers fairly, his obligation is to fix it. Another asked about his message to other companies. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Don't wait for viral video. Look at your data now. Ask minority employees what they experience. When they tell you, believe them. Act on it. Lead with integrity, or justice will lead without you. Maria approached afterward. Thank you for the second chance. I know you won't waste it, Ethan said, because you understand what was at stake, the dignity of every person made to feel less than. Outside, Flight AA2891 sat at the gate, bathed in golden light. It would return to operation tomorrow, but it would never be just another plane. It would forever be where a system was challenged, silence was broken, and justice, delayed but not denied, finally arrived. 3 days later, Marcus's video hit 47 million views. Debated in Congress, taught at Harvard. Sir Ethan Carter Justice sparked a movement. Passengers nationwide shared discrimination stories. Decades of silence was breaking. Ethan recorded a message he knew would go viral. If you've been judged by appearance instead of character, you're not alone, not crazy, not overreacting. What happened to me happens to millions daily. For too long, we've been told to accept it, to not make waves, to be grateful for spaces we paid to access. He leaned forward. Share your story. Document discrimination. Record it if safe. File complaints. Demand accountability. Don't let it be swept under the rug. Your voice matters. When enough voices speak together, systems must listen. His tone became actionable. Demand airlines publish discrimination data. Ask representatives to mandate bias training. Vote with your wallet. Support companies with real policies. Transparency, accountability. If you witness discrimination, speak up. Be the Marcus who records. Be the ally needed because silence says they're alone. Your voice says they're seen. A smile crossed his face. Satisfied? Pointed. To any airline staff watching, flight attendants, gate agents, supervisors, captains who think they can continue this, some advice. He paused. Next time you see someone who doesn't look like they belong in first class, next time you're tempted to demand extra verification, next time you're about to call security on someone who's done nothing except exist. The pause stretched. Maybe remember they might own the whole damn plane. The smile widened, playful but powerful. Real change happens when millions decide they won't accept injustice anymore, when they demand better, expect better, settle for nothing less than dignity they already deserve. He placed his hand over his heart. Respect isn't earned by status. It's owed to every soul. Fly with dignity. Land with justice. Never let anyone tell you where you don't belong. He looked into camera one final time. The sky isn't the limit when you own the runway. Within a week, the video played in training sessions, classrooms, churches nationwide. The final line became a rallying cry for anyone ever underestimated. On Flight AA2891's next departure, every first-class seat was occupied by a passenger of color, some reclaiming space, others daring to book premium for the first time. Maria worked that flight. When asked how things changed, we learned to see people instead of assumptions. That changed everything. The plane took off, climbing into a sky that now belonged to everyone equal.